Hi, everyone. Sorry I can't be with you this morning. I got double booked. So I don't know how many of you are aware, but Randy Stoltz and I used to organize the Betsy Bay Frozen 5K, which was a run from Alberta to Frankfurt for about 10 years. We got more than 200 runners, and it was an amazing community event for the off season here in Benzie County, bringing hundreds of runners and their family members to the local businesses during the winter weekend. Our last time doing it was 2020, about a month before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. We haven't brought it back since because we both filled our plates with other stuff. But we're so happy to have Michelle O'Kelly, a post-COVID transplant, along with her husband, Matt Jason, who they both recently relocated here in Benzonia from East Lansing. They're both Dems, and I think they've maybe come to one meeting. I know they want to get more involved with the Dems, so look for them in the future. But they're taking over the run for Randy and I. But since this was the first race back in 5 years, we just wanted to both be there to help out with the transition. So that's where I am this morning. I hope you don't mind, but I'm recording this. You can always email me if you have follow-up questions. So Jim asked me and Chris to do this data crunch of the 2024 election, like I try to do every few years for you guys. Um, the first thing that I looked at is how registration increased countywide this year in 2024 compared to 2020, the previous presidential election. So we had a total of 17,258 registered voters in 2024, which is 741 more than in 2020, which means that we had 4.5% more registered voters than during the last presidential election. However, something that I want to note is that this increase was about half of what we saw the previous 4 years. So what I mean by that is that, as I mentioned, we had 741 new registrants between 2020 and 2024, but we had 1,385 new registrants between 2016 and 2020. So that's almost double. Is that because we've saturated our possible registrants with our pushes to get people registered between 2016 and 2022? Is that because our birth rate is down and we have fewer people each year turning 18? Is that because voting rolls are being purged? Is that because registered voters are dying off and not being replaced? I'm not sure. Um, it's especially hard because our 2020 census wasn't a rigorous process and happened during a pandemic. So we don't even know if our total population count is very accurate. That's going to come into play a little bit later, but I just wanted you guys to be aware of that. So supposedly we had 18,555 full-time residents in 2024. That's all ages, 0 to whatever. 17,990 in 2020, 17,523 in 2016. Again, who knows how accurate those estimates are, but that's what the census tells us. All I can tell you is that our 4 year increase in voter registrations this time was half of what it was the previous 4 years between the presidential elections. And again, that's that 741 number this time compared to that 1,385. Okay, so how many of the 17,000 and some registered voters actually voted in 2024? Quite a few. We had 12,944 voters in 2024, which is 605 more voters than in 2020. So again, if we compare the previous 4 year gains, though, we're down. And before we were down by about half, and this time we're down by like 3 times as much. So it was 1,986, almost 2,000 more voters between 2016 to 2020 compared to, again, that 608 number. So again, 741 more registered voters and 608 more actual voters between 2020 to 2024, compared to what I said before, 1,385 new registered voters and close to 2,000 voters, actual voters between 2016 to 2020. Essentially, there was just a bigger push to vote between 2016 to 2020 than there was between 2020 to 2024, at least here in Benzie County. So what this tells me is that maybe we are kind of at a saturated level. I don't know. and maybe we're seeing that new normal here in Benzie County. So we always seem to have voter registration and voter turnouts that are higher than the national and the state averages. But maybe our highs are like even higher or like going to stay at this high level. One other point I just want to make real briefly is that um, I don't want to give you what the national and state averages are that other people are saying right now because they're not quite the same as the way that I'm defining them here. A lot of times what the national kind of stats are is they're talking about like people who are voting eligible, right? I mean, they're 18 and older and they're not a felon, depending on which state you're in. Um, that's like a whole other thing, like voting eligible population. But we don't even know what our population really numbers are here because again, our census maybe is messed up. And I don't even know how many of those are like 18 and older. So I did not look at voting eligible population. I just took the total number of voters and divided those by the total number of registered voters. So in Benzie County, our turnout was 75%, meaning that 75% of Benzie County's registered voters actually turned up to the polls in November. So it's that 12,000 number, 12,944 divided by the 17,258. So how many people voted actually versus how many people were registered to vote? So that's exactly the same percentage as 2020. It's up from 2016, which was 69%, 68% in 2012. We did have 74% in 2008 and 2004, but it was down at 58% in 2000. And again, I'm just looking at the presidential elections every 4 years right now. I'm not including like the gubernatorials in between or the midterms because those tend to have lower voting turnout and whatnot. So it's apples and oranges. So I'm not doing that. So it's every 4 years. Okay. So again, if we look at every 4-year presidential election back to 2000, it's 75%, 75%, 69, 68, 74, 74, 58. Okay. So Benzie County always has pretty great turnout. It's always higher than state and national averages. And this year, that 75% seems pretty on par, considering that we had 75% just 4 years ago. So that's great trend to see, right? Higher registration, higher voter turnout, higher overall number of people voting in Benzie County in 2024 compared to 2020. Though again, the gains between are not as high as what we saw between 2016 and 2020. So next we want to know how people actually voted. So I'm going to share my screen. Give me a second. Okay. So, if you look here, this is the difference in the voters. This is not the total number. So this is the total number of votes, over here. So for instance, this is Elmira Township and Trump had 1,494 votes in 2024. Okay. And Kamala Harris had 1,187. And so their totals down here, this is per township, he had 6,895. She had 5,780. If we compare those to 2020, so this was 2020. Okay. So this is what Elmira Township, what Trump had in 2020. This is what Trump had in 2024. This is what Biden had, 1064, and this is what Kamala had, 1,187, right? So these are the totals at the bottom. So if we look at that, and we go over here, which is the numbers that I did, this is the difference. So you can see that, and I'll come back to this later, but essentially if it's in red, it means that Trump got more votes in 2024 than he did in 2020. If it's yellow, it's a negative number. So he got, in Blaine Township, for instance, he got 22 fewer votes in Blaine Township than he himself did in 2020. So Kamala Harris, if she got more votes than Biden did, it's in blue. So for instance, if we look at Elmira, Trump had 67 more votes than himself in 2020, but Kamala Harris had 123 more votes than Biden did. Okay. So if we look down here at the bottom, the totals, okay, Trump had 295 more votes than he himself had in 2020. But Kamala Harris had 300 more votes than Biden did in 2020. That means that although Kamala lost to Trump, so again, 6,895 votes for him, 5,780 votes for her, she had 5 more total vote gains, the 300 compared to the 295, than he did. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And so basically it was neck and neck in terms of gained voters that they both had when compared to Biden, when compared to 2020, either Biden or Trump himself, right? So hang on, I'm sorry, my screen just did something odd, and now my computer's being slow. Please no, computer, don't do this. Okay, there. Yes, I don't need that one. I need this other one. Sorry, give me just, I'm going to pause this. Okay, sorry about that. I had to take a quick break to get to where I was. So, basically it was neck and neck in terms of gained votes, when compared, to 2020. He had 295, she had 300. We are only one of a handful of counties in the entire state that can say that, though. So I am going to share my screen again, and I'm going to show you a couple other things. So what I want to show you here is that this is this year, right? So as we know, on a national level, Kamala had a turnout problem, compared to Biden 4 years ago. It wasn't necessarily that Biden voters switched to Trump, though that definitely happened some. It was more about people just not turning out for her. Notably, the same thing happened for, to not the same extent, but it also happened to Hillary in 2016. People just didn't come out to vote for her like they had for Obama 4 years before. So at the national level, we can see right here that Kamala had 75 million votes, a little bit more, right? 75 million, 17,000 and change. Okay. Compared to Biden had 81 million, 81.3 million. Okay. So that's 6 million fewer people that voted for Kamala Harris than voted for Biden. Meanwhile, Trump had 77.3 million right here. And he had 74, yeah, sorry, it's 77.3 million. And then 4 years ago, he had 74.2 million. So he gained 3 million votes more than he had in 2020. So don't let anyone tell you that he won by a mandate, because he didn't. He won by 2 million votes, first of all, the 77 compared to the 75, right? He got only 3 million more votes than he had 4 years ago. The problem was a turnout for Kamala, more than it was people switching parties from Democrat to Republican. Again, it happened, but that wasn't as big of an issue. The Dems just didn't turn out for her like they had for Biden. If I share my screen again, I'm going to show you guys Michigan if I can on its own. Let me refresh this real quick. So if we look at, it'll let us, Michigan. Okay. So I guess it's going to zoom in for us. So we look at Michigan. Biden had 2.8 million votes right here. So you can see Biden had 2.8 million, 804 million votes. Okay. And Kamala had 2.73 million. So Trump back in 2020 had 2.649 million. And this time around, he had 2.816 million. Okay. So she lost about 68,000 votes compared to Biden 4 years ago. Meanwhile, Trump gained about 167,000 votes in Michigan. So he won Michigan by about 80,000 total votes. So, that's not so great. But the point is, it wasn't a mandate. It was more about a turnout problem. So, however, here in Benzie County, we didn't see that. We were actually one of 8 counties to swing toward Kamala Harris. So in this map, which is provided by MLive, and it is also interactive, purple indicates a shift towards Trump in 2020, even if Harris earned more of the overall vote. So for instance, I'm going to show you Washtenaw County. Okay. So we all know that Washtenaw County always votes Democrat, with Ann Arbor being there. She captured 71% of the vote, it says, and Trump had 26.6% of the vote, right? So She won handily Washtenaw County. However, it says that that county swung 2.2 percentage points towards Trump, which is why it's purple, even though it's swing towards Trump means purple, even though she won that county. Okay. So you can see much of the state swung towards him. He had a higher percentage point this time around than he did in 2020. However, there are these green counties. So we have Ottawa, Manistee, Leelanau, Benzie, Grand Traverse, Charlevoix, Emmett, and Presque Isle. Okay. So if you look at the green counties, you'll see that those represent places where Harris outperformed Biden's 2020 numbers. So for us in Benzie County, there we go. That means that although Kamala got 45% of the vote here compared to Trump's 53.7% of the vote, he saw on the back end, I did these numbers, he saw a 0.4 swing towards himself, which again is that 295 votes that I talked about. But she saw a 0.7% swing over Biden, which was that 300 votes, which means that we had a 0.3%. They say 0.4. I'm not sure exactly what's the difference is, but it's very small swing to the left total overall. Again, it's not much. It's 300 votes compared to 295. But those 300 votes for her was a bigger swing than the 295 votes that Trump got. She did 5.5% better in Benzie County than Biden did, and Trump only did 4.5% better than he himself did in 2020. So I'm going to say that one more time and try to let it sink in because I know I've thrown a lot of numbers at you. Kamala's gains were slightly more than Trump's by 5 votes. So even though she lost here, she did 300 votes better than Biden did in 2020, and Trump only did 295 better than himself in 2020. So we are one of 8 counties in green here in the entire state that swung left instead of right compared to 2020. So Jim really wants me to hit this point home because it's a win that should be celebrated. And you can see that the pinky was lit up green. Our neighbors to the north and south saw the same results. Leelanau, Grand Traverse, Manistee counties, all were places where Kamala did better than Biden did in 2020, which is pretty impressive when you compare that to the other counties in our state, but is especially impressive if we remember those big numbers that I mentioned nationally. Remember, Trump did 3 million better than himself in 2020, but Kamala did 6 million worse than Biden did. So the fact that she did 300 better than Biden in Benzie County is a big deal. What that tells me is that the message of the Benzie Dems and our neighboring Northwest Michigan groups is working. Your hard work at the Benzie Dems, the letter writing campaign, the township lookouts, the community pop-ups, the calls, the door knocking, all of it is making a difference here to help swing Benzie County left, even if the rest of the state and the county and the country is swinging right. Please, if you take nothing else away from me and my data and all the numbers today, remember that our little pinky in Michigan is green because of your hard work. So good job. Okay, so if we get into the nitty gritty on the township level, let me pull up my other things that I have for you. Okay, so here we go. So this is the one I wanted. Okay, so I'm going to share this. Okay, again, this is 2020 and this is Biden versus Trump, and this is 2024. This is Harris versus Trump. It should say that. I'm sorry, it doesn't. But hopefully you know who ran in each election. So, okay. So back in 2020, you can see that Biden won 5 townships. So that's why they're blue. Okay. If Biden won them, they're blue. So for instance, we've got Crystal Lake Township had 465 votes for Biden and only 368 for Trump in 2020, right? 490 for Frankfurt for Biden compared to 317 in Frankfurt for Trump, 296 compared to 240. You guys can see these, right? So Biden won 5 of our voting precincts. He won Crystal Lake, Gilmore, Lake, and Platte Township, and the city of Frankfurt. In 2024, Kamala still won 5, but it was a slightly different 5. So she won Blaine right up here, this blue one in 195 compared to 179. Okay. She won Blaine, Crystal Lake, Gilmore, and Lake Township, and the city of Frankfort. And if you look, she only lost Platt, which is one of the ones that Biden had last time, by one vote. It was 140 to 139. So I kind of call that one a wash. But the other thing I want to note is that this, her winning 5 precincts is still fewer than what Gretchen Whitmer won. So back in 28, Whitmer also won 5. But in 2022, she won 7. So she won Blaine, Benzonia, Crystal Lake, Gilmore, Lake, Platt, and Frankfort. That will come up a little bit later. But I just want you guys to know that that Kamala Harris won fewer of our precincts than what Whitmer did 2 years ago. And that shouldn't be a huge surprise because Whitmer won our county and obviously Harris lost our county, but it shows a pattern, right, that I'm going to start talking about. So what that seems to be indicating to me is that we've got a few townships that are like solid blue, right? And then we've got a few that are on the verge of switching from red to blue. So for instance, Blaine Township, the last 2 elections in 2024 and in 2022 with Whitmer, Blaine Township has gone blue both of those times. And previous to that, it was red. Okay. Let's see. And Platt is right on the border, right? So this seems to kind of line up with some of the priorities of the Benzie Dems lately. And like where we're putting a lot of time and a lot of energy. So what I want to do is, again, I want to say when we compare the 2024 numbers to 2020 on the township level, we see, so what I'm going to do here is I'm changing this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change to this one. So now what I'm doing, remember these numbers are how many more votes each candidate got than the person who was running in their party the last time. So again, in Elmira Township, for instance, Trump had 67 more votes than he himself had in 2020. Harris had 123 more votes than Biden had in Elmira Township in 2020. Okay. Benzonia had 40 more votes for Trump than he did in 2020. But we see that that Harris had 1 fewer vote, just 1, than Biden did in 2020. So it kind of held. Okay. We lost 1, but it's not a big significant loss. So, sorry, let me get back to my notes. I'm going a little off script, but I'm trying to make sure that this makes sense to you guys. So where am I? So here we go. So a reminder that this one shows that Kamala had 5 precincts that she won. And again, they were Blaine, Crystal Lake, Gilmore, Lake, and Frankfort. Okay. That's where she got more votes than Trump did. But in terms of comparing her to Biden in 2020, she saw gains in 10 of the 13. 10 of the 13 precincts. Okay. The largest gain was what I showed you, 123 in Elmira Township. She had 60 more than Biden did in Lake. She had 50 more than Biden did in Frankfort. Okay. She had 31 more in Inland, etc. You can see them. They're all in blue. So she lost 1 vote in Benzonia, as I said. She lost 2 votes in Blaine. Again, that's kind of holding. And then she lost 25 votes in Gilmore compared to Biden in 2020. But again, she won Blaine Township compared to Trump in 2024. So that's here. She had 195 votes to his 179, even though technically she lost 1 vote compared to Biden. What that means is that obviously we see here, Trump lost 22 votes compared to himself. So that's how that happened, because it wasn't a very big margin that she won it by. So you can see that Trump had gains in the red in all but 5 of his precincts, meaning that she had gains in 10 and he had gains in 8. Okay. So he lost votes in Blaine. He lost 22 votes in Blaine. He lost 18 votes in Crystal Lake. He lost 1 vote in Gilmore, it kind of held. He lost 28 votes in Lake, and he lost 3 votes in Weldon. And again, he saw 67 more voters in Elmira. That was one of his big gains. He saw 62 more votes in Homestead. His biggest one was he saw 111 more votes in Inland Township and 40 here in Benzonia. Again, you can see those. So what I notice here is that the gains of Harris over Biden was bigger than that of Trump over himself in Elmira, for instance. So again, that's that 67 compared to the 123. So she got 123 more votes than Biden, while Trump only gained 67 over himself. These are good trends to keep in mind. And again, notably, this happened a lot. We saw this in 2022 with Whitmer. She actually, with Whitmer, from 2022 to 2018, when she was, comparing her numbers in 2022 compared to 2018, we saw gains in every precinct for Whitmer. So essentially all of this was blue and not just all but 3. Okay. And that's just a good thing to like keep in mind to see that just to see that. And especially because back then the Republicans only saw 6 of their precinct gains. So this time they saw 10 and last time they only saw 6. So one of the biggest differences though is that Whitmer got 900 more votes in 2022 than she did in 2018 against herself. And that Republican candidate between those 2 years, 2018 to 2022, only got 100 more votes. So obviously, like that's a much bigger margin of difference than the 295 to the 300, but still, it's just something to keep in mind. So let's see. So we didn't see the same margins of gains with Kamala as we did with Whitmer, like I said, but it was similar in that the biggest gains were in Elmira Township. With Whitmer in 2022, she saw big gains there. And we see that again this time when we compare Harris. So it seems to be steadily moving blue in Elmira Township, even if technically there still is a 300 gap, because we're seeing that Trump had 1,494 votes and Harris only had 1,187. So that's about a 300 difference, 300 vote, but that difference is tightening. So for instance, in 2020 in Elmira Township, the difference between Trump and Biden was 362 votes. But this year for Harris, it was only 307 votes. So again, and that's with having Harris have a turnout problem elsewhere, right? So like, imagine if we had an even more popular candidate, I guess is my point, is that Elmira Township is steadily creating that gap. It's making that gap smaller. So again, if we look at the places where the increases were highest over 2020, Elmira Township saw an increase in both Democrat voters and Republican voters. Again, that 67 compared to that 123. But our increase was double what the Republicans were. 67 to 123 is almost double, right? However, their gains in Inland Township down here, which is 111 to 31, that's like 4 times almost as much, right? So they picked up a lot of voters there. But there are also places where the Democrats picked up voters and the Republicans lost voters. Like look at Lake Township. We gained 60 and they lost 28. So that's a pretty big swing. And so if we dig down into that one, sorry, I lost my place on my page again. Yeah, so does that mean that 28 of those 60 votes were people switching from Republican to Democrat? I don't know. I can't tell you that. They might have just been new voters for Kamala, especially since we had 63 new registered voters in Lake Township. So maybe 60 of those 63 new voters all voted for Harris. I don't know. Did the Republicans just stay home? Again, I don't know. I can just tell you that there were 63 new registered voters and Kamala got 60 more votes than Biden did, and Trump had 28 less than he himself had in 2020. So Lake Township is another place to kind of look at. And again, we already won it handily. It was 315 to 417. But again, that's a place where the gap is widening in Lake Township compared to when we're looking at Elmira Township, where the gap is narrowing, which is what we want it to be. So the last thing that I want to mention that I found really interesting was when I dug into the county commissioner race, because when I saw that Blaine had switched, right? I wanted to kind of dig a little deeper into that. So I think I want to look at, sorry to be bouncing around. I think it was this one. It might be the other one, but let me get to my notes. So yeah, so the last thing I want to mention, so Blaine and Gilmore are places where Kamala won at the top of the ticket. And Blaine and Gilmore are put in the same bag as Joyfield and Weldon Township, and they make up District 7. So Gary Sauer is the Republican incumbent. You can see him here. And he went up against Javed Shah, who started as a write-in primary or write-in candidate during the primary and was able to then run as a Democrat in the November election. So Gary actually earned more votes than Trump. You can see down here, he has, is it this one I'm supposed to be showing you? No, it was that one. So he has 1,089 votes. And right here where it says Republican, that's supposed to be Trump. So Trump had 967 votes in District 7, whereas Gary Sauer had 1,089. And then Javed Shah had 681 votes compared to Kamala had 837 at the top of the ticket. Okay. I mean, you can see these are the top of the ticket numbers. They didn't change much in District 7 overall total between 2020 to 24. We have 967 for Trump, 956 for Trump. We have 837 for Kamala and 836 for Biden. So, Gary earned more votes than Trump at the top of the ticket. Gary got 122 more votes than Trump, but Javed had 156 fewer votes than Kamala at the top. In other words, Trump won District 7 by 130 votes, okay? But Gary Sauer won District 7 by 408 votes, almost 3 times as much. I know that I'm not on the campaign committee, but that 130 votes at the top of the ticket, which again is that 967 compared to that 837 right there in the center, that 130 votes doesn't seem insurmountable to me, especially when we see some of the trends that are happening in some of these places. It looks like we just need to remind people to vote all the way down the ballot, which I know can be an issue, but also that there, are there people that can be flipped and or to be convinced to come out for county commission race, even if they don't vote at the top of the ticket, because obviously something like that is going on if Gary got more votes than what Trump did, right? So I'm pointing this out in part because the previous 2 presidential elections in 2022 and in 2020, Donald Smeltzer ran as no party affiliated candidate. And that was because, as I understand it, I could be wrong, but Jim can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the Dems were kind of worried about running a straight out Dem in those supposedly like red townships. Okay. So you guys still supported him and canvassed for him, but he wasn't on the ticket as a Dem. So this is the first time that we can really kind of compare that idea of running a no party compared to running as a real Dem. Again, I'd have to dig into the numbers more, but the fact that if you look here, Javed had 681 votes and he was on the ticket as a Dem, right? And Don Smeltzer had 686 and he was no party affiliate. I don't know. I just feel like there's something there. It's only 5 votes fewer than Don did in the past presidential. And the fact that Trump's gain in 2024 over 2020 was only 11 votes. I just feel like Kamala's gain was only 1 over Biden in District 7. So we can see that like Trump lost votes in Blaine and Kamala was pretty steady there. Let me see, where were those numbers? I think that's in this one. No, it's in, yeah. Okay. So if we look at like, so here we go. So Kamala had 195, Biden had 197, right? And that's how you're kind of starting to see where these numbers are. So you can see that Trump lost votes in Blaine, right? He lost 22 or something votes in Blaine, and Kamala held pretty steady there. Trump was steady in Gilmore, Kamala lost 25. Trump gained 37 votes in Joyfield. Kamala gained 12 there. Trump held pretty steady in Weldon, but Kamala gained 16. So I guess my point is, if we continue to see some of those shifts, it potentially could become a competitive district in like the next election cycle or maybe the one after. What's really going to be interesting is the fact that those county commissions are now on a 4-year cycle instead of they've been on a 2-year cycle. Um, anyway, I just wanted to close this out and say that the point is that the Benzie Dems have been doing really good work over the past 8 years, especially. I've been with you guys since 2016 doing your Facebook and then crunching these numbers. And in a few key areas, it looks like it's starting to really show, like that all of your work is like starting to kind of, pay off in certain areas, especially. And again, it doesn't mean that the Dems won in those townships necessarily. Again, Elmira Township is a really good example. The Dems lost Elmira Township. Like, Kamala did not beat Trump in Elmira Township. But if we keep gaining 123 votes every election and they keep only gaining 67 votes over themselves, which again, we saw those same sort of numbers with Whitmer. She gained 180 and they only gained 100 or 80. And so the difference was like 100 votes. And so if we keep seeing those kinds of steady gains, we could win Elmira in just a few years' time. So that's kind of the thing to keep in mind as we move forward. And definitely remember that pinky. Your work it matters, and it is making a difference. So I just wanted to give you guys some perspective on that, on the whole idea as a whole, and then breaking down sort of some of those areas that you might want to focus on in the next 2 to 4 years. So I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. I hope this was somewhat interesting. If you have questions, you can always get my email from Jim, and we can email or phone call, or I can share this data with you. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.